Chapter 289. 3. Early summer snowed. Song Jian scoffed disdainfully, and then said in a sinister voice, "Go ahead and deny it all you want. Just hope that you will be able to defend yourself so confidently when I come to bring out the evidence to prove it. The Grand Priest can do as you please." Qingyu replied with a smile, extending a hand out to show an inviting gesture. Song Jian's face turned dark as charcoal, and with a vicious flick of his sleeves, he turned himself around and left in a huff. It looked like he was more than a little infuriated. Qingyu shook her head and went on to stride away as well. As she walked, she could not help but to lift a hand up to rub her chin thoughtfully, and mumbled softly to herself, "Have I done anything to give myself away at all? I don't think so. My acting had clearly been flawlessly perfect. But it seems like this Song Jian is not someone that's easy to deceive. To think that he was able to sense that things were not what they seemed. She can only hope that she would not be exposed in front of Qing Luo Yan before the mind-free peak manifests itself. Wonder how Mother is doing now." Qingyu slowly raised her head up to gaze at the moon hanging up in the night sky, a faint tinge of worry showing between her brows. She just could not help but feel that something bad was going to happen. Cloud heavens intersecting borders. A good number of people have gathered here. People from the 5 great powers, except for the Bright Moon Divine Temple, had their people present. The Divine Temple was after all a place that felt a little mysterious to the people outside, and they would naturally not send their people here in advance. When night fell, it was exceptionally quiet everywhere, where even the sound of birds and insects were absent, just the occasional sound of hushed whispering voices. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You in the tent. Zhuge Xiong was grumbling softly, his good-looking countenance tightly creased up, the indigence he felt showing clearly on his face. As the mighty top boss of the Hunters Guild, reduced to being made to sleep out here in the wilderness, and in a crude and ratty tent such as this. He was even very nearly bitten earlier by a low-level spirit beast who must have been blind to know who he was, and that had caused his already gloomy mood to grow more depressed. It must be said that such trifling stuff should be handled by his subordinates, but that man Qing Tianlin just had to drag him along. If not for that irresistibly tempting offer made, he would never subject himself to endure such suffering. Looking at the man's gloomy expression, Qing Tianlin could not help but laugh out loud. "Come on, there are so many people here and you're not the only one. Moreover, it won't be just you, as the leaders of the other great powers will definitely come here personally as well. For you to have come here earlier than them, wouldn't that allow you to familiarize yourself with the terrain better, so that we can think of ways to let us go in first?" Chapter 289. 4. Early summer snow. What you said sounds reasonable. Zhuge Xiong said with her brows furrowed up, and the crease slowly relaxed as he continued to think about that. On the other side, a group of people were leaning against a large rock to rest. "Young lord, you went to see that person already?" A woman's raspy voice sounded that pulled back Qing Yili's faraway thoughts. He then turned his eyes to look at the woman standing behind him. She had a tall and slender figure, her long hair covering half of her face. The exposed half of her face was sharp and beautiful, alluring and captivating, her incomparably jet-black eyes seeming to glow under the night. Qing Yili glanced at her, and then turned his eyes away, before he said in an indifferent voice, "I did. The young lord looks rather troubled. Are you thinking of that person?" The woman continued to ask in her raspy voice. "So what if I am?" Qing Yili's eyes gazed far into the distance, and it was not known whether he was speaking to her, or just mumbling to himself. "For me to be able to watch her like this now, it is enough for me. Every time that person is mentioned, my young lord would always act so self-inferior. It really makes me curious just what kind of a person she is that could make my young lord react like this." "Of course you would not understand," Qing Yili interrupted the woman in an emotionless voice. "You do not even know warmth itself, as you people from the snake tribe are born cold-blooded. Compared to you, am I not a lot more fortunate?" The woman was taken aback for a moment, before a corner of her lips stiffened. Her tone of voice sounded a little strange as she said, "That's right. I will never be able to understand how that feels. Seeing that Qing Yili was unwilling to say anything more about it, the woman was not about to continue asking to be snubbed, and so she went walking away to one side in silence. Time trickled by, and it seemed that late night came in the blink of an eye. Qing Yili did not feel the slightest bit sleepy, as he gazed at the several flickering stars in the sky, when he suddenly thought of a time back in the past, when he and Qing Yu took a trip out for rigorous training, where they lost their footing and fell into a very deep hole. From inside that tiny gap, they could only see several dimly lit stars in the sky, the scene very much similar to now. But everything has become different now, and Qing Yu was no longer there by his side. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The more he came to understand the gaping chasm, and the many other obstacles between them, Qing Yili became more prone to reminiscing about the past. He remembered that it was a very, very cold and snowy day when they met for the first time. He suddenly felt something cold running down his cheek, one light fluttering speck, then two. Qing Yili raised a hand up to wipe at his face, and discovered a pristine white frost on his fingers. He was taken aback by surprise for an instant, as he watched it slowly melt on his fingertips, not moving for a good while. It was snowing. Just as the season was going into early summer, the sky that just sent winter away a few months ago was suddenly snowing. Chapter 290. 1. Just before parting, the expression on Qing Yili's face was stunned as he stared at his own hand for a long while, looking like he thought that he was seeing things. Soon, he raised his eyes to gaze up into the sky and saw many white fluffy specks fluttering down lazily. What the hell? What kind of a goddamned weather is this? How could it possibly be snowing? Someone could not help but curse out loudly, though that still could not fully reflect the astonishment that everyone was feeling. Upon hearing those words, some people who were still in their tents felt puzzled, and they all came out one after another. When they saw the strange scene, they were so stunned they were at a loss for words. Such a strange phenomenon had never been seen in cloud heaven before, the 4 seasons occurring very normally every year. Seeing snow fall at the beginning of summer was the first time it has happened. And the devil's hand is always at play when things take such a strange turn. Could it be? The snowfall was light when it started, but as time slowly trickled by, the snow at everyone's feet began to pile up till it reached around their ankles. Looking at the way the snow was coming down, it did not seem like it was going to stop anytime soon, but would instead become more and more intense. Are they, trying to freeze us all to death here in this place? Someone struggled to mutter through chattering teeth. It is snowing only here in this place. A young lady's puerile voice piped out. Someone turned to look towards that voice, and saw a young girl who looked to be only about 12 or 13 years old. A petite and pretty little thing with an adorable-looking face. But the look on her face was contrastingly mature and calm-looking, not matching to one of her young age. She stood on one leg high upon a large boulder, her eyes peering far into the distance as she pointed with one finger and said, "It's not snowing over there." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But everyone else's line of sight was a lot more limited, and it was also late at night at that moment, pitch dark everywhere. The furthest they could see would only be just a few hundred meters at most, and from what they could see, the place that the young lady was pointing at looked like it was also snowing, no different from where they were at. "Look carefully, little Yen, is it really only snowing here?" The woman with half of her face covered by her hair looked at her and said. Hearing that, the young girl turned to look expressionlessly at the woman, the tone of her voice tinged with a hint of displeasure as she replied, "My eyes have never been mistaken with what they see before." Under the night's darkness, the young girl's large eyes actually looked like they were glowing faintly red, that carried a hint of bloodthirsty ruthlessness. The young girl, who was such a pretty and adorable little thing in the day, seemed to change in personality at night, looking like a completely different person. It was feared that no one could have thought that such a harmless and adorable little girl would be someone who actually possesses dual personalities hidden in her bones. Chapter 290. 2. Just before parting in the day, she was a pure untainted angel, but would turn into a terrifying demon when night fell, reaping the lives of humans without a single ounce of mercy. "It's true that it's only snowing here," Qing Yili then said indifferently, People of the wolf tribe were born to prowl in the night, and hence were able to see extremely well in the dark, their eyes able to penetrate a very far distance. If Qing Yi Li, who possessed the wolf tribe's blood, was saying that as well, it was only natural that nobody would doubt it any longer. Under the dim darkness of the night, the man's head of silver hair, and his unusual pair of dark green eyes, were exceptionally eye-catching. But no one seemed to have noticed when the man had appeared. Logically, for such an outstanding-looking man to suddenly appear, it was not possible that it did not cause the slightest stir. Who is that man? That is a very unfamiliar-looking face. Someone rubbed at his chin and muttered softly. He is not the only unfamiliar-looking one. Those people beside him are all faces we've never seen before as well. My guess is that they are not from Cloud Heaven. Otherwise, how could we have never met a person with such a striking appearance? Another person said, joining the conversation. But the snow was falling more heavily now, and everyone was too preoccupied with their own things to pay Qing Yi Li and his group much more attention. They were all dressed rather thinly in this season, and the people were all busy summoning up their spirit powers to resist the sudden bitter cold. Young lord, what is your opinion? A tall and lanky man opened his mouth to ask. Qing Yi Li was silent for a while before he raised his head up to look up into the sky, a vast dark canvas. But something seemed to be changing with that darkness. The mind-free peak is probably going to appear. It seemed like the snowfall at Cloud Heaven's intersecting borders did not affect any other place, making it look like they were places in two separate worlds. Over at the Bright Moon Divine Temple, Qing Luoyin only sent 2 people out to go see what was happening, portraying a placid calm towards the matter regarding the mind-free peak, like she was not anxious about it at all, and that everything was in control. This night, Qing Luoyin did not rest, but asked Qing Yu to accompany her for a walk. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Looking more closely at the moon tonight, it seemed like another part of it had quietly gone missing, but it was however exceptionally bright, lighting up the ground clearly while they took a leisurely stroll. Yu Qing, do you have any kin or family down in the lower realm? As they took a slow walk, Qing Luoyin suddenly opened her mouth to ask. Although Qing Yu was surprised, she still managed to be calm and composed as she answered. No. What has this woman's mind managed to come up with again? Why is she suddenly asking her such a question? Hearing that, Qing Luoyin merely smiled. It's nothing actually. Just thought that you look very much like another person. Chapter 293. Just before parting, the Temple Lord said the same thing when I saw the Temple Lord the very first time. Qing Yu replied, yes, I did. But I have been dreaming constantly of that person recently. Seeing much she looked like you. I just could not help thinking about her. Qing Luoyin halted in her steps, and turned herself around to look at her as she spoke. Qing Yu's eyes glinted darkly. Is she testing her here? Having led her to fall into those dreams, the woman would naturally see her mother often. But in order to gain the woman's trust, she had not made her dream anymore for a very long time. So, how could the woman possibly still continue to dream of her mother constantly? Has she begun to suspect something? Or could it be that Song Jian would really rather have all the fish die than destroy the net, and have told Qing Luoyin everything? That is quite improbable. He would probably not exact vengeance in such a foolish manner onto himself. Qing Yu thought through many things in just that one instant, but her face did not change in the slightest, but just maintained a smile as she looked at the woman and said, it just makes me wonder who is this person that you are thinking of so frequently. She is actually my youngest sister. Qing Luoyan's lips stiffened as she opened her mouth to reply. Qing Yu was a little surprised for a moment, never thinking that she would really reveal it to her. She had thought that the woman would just mention any name to casually brush her off. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Having mentioned that person, Qing Luoyin seemed to lose herself in her past memories, the expression on her face suddenly softening and looking more tender. When I was a child, my gift was one of the most outstanding among all my other siblings, and hence became exceptionally proud and arrogant. That also caused all of them to be highly displeased with me, making our relationship frosty and distant. I have 10 other siblings, but I was only closer to just this youngest little sister of mine. It could be because she was the one and only person who was not bothered no matter how harsh and cold my words were to her. She was the only fool who was still willing to be friendly to me. My other sisters could not stand me, and they were always thinking of ways to bully and make fun of me, putting in all kinds of strange bugs and insects in my clothes, or making a horrible mess of them. When she saw that happen, she took all her own dresses and gave them all to me, before going on to get rid of all those ruined clothes of mine in secret, so that I will not have to see them. Speaking up to that point, Qing Luoyan could not help but to laugh softly, her gaze lowering slightly before she continued. It was because she was afraid that I would be sad, though I do not care about such things at all. She always thought that I was rather fragile and pitiful, and would always try to be nicer to me. But she was clearly the youngest one among us, the one who should be required to be cared for the most. Chapter 290. 4. Just before parting, Qing Yu had come to know quite a bit about the past grievances between her mother and Qing Luoyan from Lu Junyao's mouth, but she had never known that the two sisters had actually been so close to each other once before. But how did the two of them then become enemies who sought to take each other's lives in the end? I was similarly repulsed by my other siblings who put on a false sanctimonious and dignified front, but would secretly do completely different things behind my back, and so I became closer and closer to this youngest sister of mine. We were so close that there were no secrets between us, and we could even share everything we had with each other. A twitch tugged at the corner of Qing Yu's brow, like she could almost guess what Qing Luoyan was going to tell her next. As she thought, Qing Luoyan suddenly laughed softly when she spoke up till that point before she continued. But in the end, no one could have thought that the two of us would fall for the same man. Had it really been her father Mo Jingyu's appearance that caused the two sisters to turn from friends to foes? Qing Yu could not help but sigh inwardly in her heart when she heard that unrequited love really brings one a lot of trouble. But Qing Yu had never expected that Qing Luoyan's words following that would turn out completely different from what she had imagined. I loved that man very much, and it could be said that my heart only had eyes for him alone. You will not understand how difficult it was for a person as haughty and aloof as me to be able to love someone. That was the case for me to come to love him, and to have grown to love her as well. The two most important people in my life were together, and that was while she knew that I was in love with that man, but she still got together with him. From that moment on, I began to feel that I hated her. She betrayed the close relationship that the two of us shared, and betrayed the trust one had in her. I told her that from then onwards, we will no longer be sisters, but just strangers in passing. I felt like I was very sad, and wanted to hide myself, to nurse my wounds quietly. But not long after that, I suddenly met a person. That person told me that I should not give up, as that man belonged to me rightfully, telling me that I should go fight for him, because I am in no way inferior to her at all, asking me isn't that right? Upon hearing that, Qing Yu felt a sensitive nerve tense up in her mind. She seemed to have just heard something that was highly crucial, something that could be linked to the entire truth behind everything that had happened in the past. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She could not help but clench her hands up tightly. It was as if I was cast under a spell when I decided to go make an attempt to fight for him. I had clearly known that man first, and in terms of looks, cultivation and knowledge, I was in no way inferior to my younger sister, so it was only right that he should be in love with me. But I came to discover that I was wrong. When a person does not love you, it can only mean that he doesn't. No matter how hard I tried, he will never come to love me. He told me that right from the start, the person he liked had never been me, and he told me to get out of his sight. I was completely heartbroken, and I decided to leave him completely. But the mysterious person I met previously appeared all of a sudden, and gave something to me. He told me that I will only need to find a chance to use it on that man, and he will then come to love me, and will only love me alone from then on. I struggled with myself for a while, but it was as if I was possessed when the feeling of wanting to have him became frightfully strong and intense. In the end, I really managed to make him fall in love with me. Chapter 291. 1. Taken away. But it was a great pity it lasted only 3 short days. That thing controlled his body, but was unable to control his heart. He would rather suffer bone-rotting and heart-gnawing torment than to really love me. From that moment on, my heart really softened. It had not been comfortable for me to see how painful and agonizing it was for him as well, as that was someone I loved so much after all. So how could I bear to really hurt him like that? But it was all too late. Qing Luoyin seemed to be deeply pained and overcome with remorse, her eyes filling up with tears. Her voice was slightly choked up when she continued to say, "From the moment I started to lay that spell on him, it was fated that he would die, because his will was just too strong, and he resisted with everything he had. So his body was wrecked by the voodoo grubs more severely, causing his cultivation to deteriorate by a great deal, and his life to hang just by a thread. Finally, I lost my mind and wanted to kill my younger sister. He blocked my most lethal strike on my younger sister's behalf, and his very spirit soul shattered into splinters and died on the spot. In order to preserve his flesh body, my sister used a forbidden art, and both her flesh body and spirit soul were obliterated." When she reached the end, Qing Luoyan's voice was slowly regaining its calm, till it became monotonous, like she was just relating someone else's story, and it had nothing to do with her at all. The two people whom I loved most had died at my hands. Qing Luoyan turned herself slowly around to look at Qingyu, the smile at the corners of her lips ironic and chilling to see. "Tell me, am I not such a great fool? All of this was done by my own hands. If I had chosen to let it go in the beginning, none of that would have happened, wouldn't it?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu eyes glinted sharply, as she seemed to contemplate on the matter for a moment, before she opened her mouth to say in a soft voice, "I wonder if the mysterious person the temple lord mentioned is." The thing she was most concerned with was of course that mysterious person, whom Qing Luoyan had mentioned a few times. After she finished listening to Qing Luoyan's words, she seemed to feel that everything that happened was hiding a complex and sinister plot behind it all, like everything had been predetermined right from the start, and that Qing Luoyan was merely a borrowed knife, used by the shadowy mastermind at the back of all that. However, Qing Luoyan then came to shake her head lightly. "I have never seen that person's looks before. Every time he appeared, I was only able to see his faint silhouette, and his voice always sounded like he was very far away, as if it came out from behind many barriers, layer upon layer." Qingyu's brows knitted up for a moment. Based only on this unclear description, she would not be able to determine who the other party really was in any way, but what she was certain of was that this person was not just ordinarily powerful. Chapter 291. 2. Taken away the fact that Qing Luoyan was able to sit on the bright moon divine temple's seat, as the temple lord, for such a long time, was not just because of her sly methods, but she also possessed extraordinary cultivation as well. But the cultivation powers of this mysterious person that she spoke of was far above hers. Only a very rare few were able to possess such high and unfathomable cultivation in cloud heaven. But there were also exceptions. Every single person in the mine-free peak was said to be unmatched experts who possessed unparalleled cultivation, people who possessed divine powers that ordinary mortals could not have. The one that had come into her dreams back then was a dream-eating demon, who was able to easily invade people's dreams to achieve a certain objective. That one could only be considered as a low-level cultivation, but even though that was the case, she had had a hard time dealing with it at that time. Looks like the saying that there's always someone better, always another heaven beyond the one you see is true. She came to discover after coming to this world just how important it was to possess immense power. In the place, the weak will only find themselves devoured till not even any bones are left. But she has also discovered something else that was very strange. Why is Qing Luoyan suddenly telling her all this tonight? Mistrustful and suspicious as she always was, she seemed to trust her so much now, but that was only merely because she was useful to the woman, and Qingyu was not about to be so full of herself to think that Qing Luoyan would not hide any secrets from her. Hence, she immediately asked herself. This revelation of the secrets she kept buried in the deepest reaches of her heart. What was the purpose? Do you know? I should be protecting you in the first place. Just as Qingyu was puzzling over all that, Qing Luoyin suddenly opened her mouth to say those strange words out of the blue. But because you are just too smart and you know too much about things that you shouldn't know about. Qing Luoyin continued to say softly, as she looked at Qingyu with an indiscernible gaze. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. I wonder what the Temple Lord's words really mean. Qingyu asked with an eyebrow arched up. Qing Luoyin stiffened a corner of her lips, and then said with a soft laugh. Do you know why your mother had to die back then? The expression on Qingyu's face congealed, and the aura around her body grew grave and severe. Seeing that, Qing Luoyin shook her head helplessly before she gave a soft sigh and said, Do you really think that I will not be guarded against you? Why do you think that I was able to make myself keep you by my side? Speaking up till that point, Qing Luoyin's voice then became tinged with self-scorn as she said, Maybe it is because of the guilt I felt towards her. Chapter 291. 3. Taken away. The two of you really look just too much alike. The first time I saw you, I was already suspicious, but you actually hid it very well. If not for the time that you got into the scrolls chamber so easily, a place that even Song Jian was unable to get close to, I might really have been deceived by you. You might not know this, but only the godly Lord himself and people who were chosen to keep the scrolls chamber tidy are able to enter that place. Since then, there had only been one exception to that rule, and that was my youngest sister Qing Lan Fei, the goddess born with possession of phoenix fire. The magnetic field of her blood unexpectedly coincides with the scrolls chambers, and that was why she was able to go in and out at will. Besides that, no one else was able to gain entry into the scrolls chamber. But you became the second exception after her. Qing Luoyan's gaze was fixed closely on her as she continued on, pausing at every word. Because in your body, you inherited the phoenix fire that she possessed. Qingyu would never have ever thought that she had slipped up there. Qingyu curved up the ends of her lips. Though her identity had just been exposed, her expression still did not show the slightest fear or panic. But she went on to say with an indifferent smile on her face, Since the Temple Lord already knows my real identity, I need not play touchy with you any longer. My only objective in coming here is just to take back something that belongs to my mother. Take back something that belongs to your mother? Qing Luoyin was startled for a moment, before she scoffed out loud. She swept her gaze around the place and then asked, You mean this entire divine temple here? Huh. It was not what I wanted in the first place, but it's just a chess piece that has served my purpose for many years. Neither you nor your mother will be able to escape. Qing Luoyin did not continue with her words, but just threw her head back in laughter. Under the bright moon's illumination, at the corners of the woman's extremely beautiful eyes, it looked as though the faint glimmer of tears could suddenly be seen flowing. At that same moment, Qingyu sensed something else, and she lifted her head up to look, only to discover that the moon that was lacking had only one half of a sphere left. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The thing that did not change was that it was still exceptionally bright, but seemed brighter than before. The moon was clearly hanging in the sky a far distance away, but it seemed as if it was so close at the same time. So close that its cold chill could almost be felt, sending tingles up a person's spine. Qingyu's eyes narrowed as she stared up at the sudden flurries of snow falling down from the sky, landing on her shoulders and her hair. The temperature in the air plummeted in an instant, so icy cold that it seemed like it would freeze the blood in a person and seep right into their bones. If she was not dressed in her thin and light summer dress at that moment, she might very have thought that it was winter. But that chillingly cold season had clearly passed not that long ago. That strange and bizarre scene immediately made Qingyu clenched up her hands tightly subconsciously, as she surveyed her surroundings warily. Chapter 291. 4. Taken away. Qing Luoyin shut her eyes and said in an almost inaudible whisper, her voice not carrying the slightest emotion, It's no use, he is already here. He? Who is he? A feeling of imminent danger looming caused Qingyu's body to tense up tightly, and her long phoenix-like eyes to widen slightly. She peered into the distance under the night sky, and could just make out the faint silhouette of a person who was slowly coming closer, stopping at about 100 meters away. From the looks of the figure, it was a man. You can leave now. The person's voice sounded very young, crystalline and melodious like jade beads falling onto a porcelain dish, just like the cold aloof moon and frosty snow. Enchanting but also highly dangerous. After those words were spoken, Qing Luoyan then turned her eyes to gaze deeply at Qingyu for a moment, and her lips then parted to say, "Farewell." Upon saying that, the woman then turned around and walked away slowly. Who are you? In that icy cold snow, only Qingyu, and that man who stood so far away his countenance could not be seen was left. The mysterious person that Qing Luoyan spoke about before was probably this very person here. The hidden mastermind who caused her parents to become parted between life and death back then. The man did not respond to her question, but just said in an indifferent voice, "You are very calm. To think that someone your age is able to possess such temperament. You are really just like Lan Fei, an extraordinary character." Qingyu narrowed her eyes. "What have you done to my mother?" It was just as she thought. These people had come from the mine-free peak. They were just pretending to let her mother leave back then, and their real intention had been to completely destroy her all along. What kind of a divine realm is that? The people from there are all so utterly despicable and unscrupulous. I don't think she is doing all that well. After all, to still spare her life despite her being a traitor is already being benevolent enough. The man's voice was tinged with a hint of mirth. "All right now, my child, do not persist in being so obstinate and come with me to where you need to be at." "If I refuse?" Qingyu's face was expressionless, her voice cold. "Don't you already know what the result will be? You're such an intelligent young lady. The snow tonight is supposed to fall only in one particular place, and that is at the spot where the mine-free peak will soon manifest." The man's voice paused for an instant, seemingly carrying a faint sliver of tenderness. He then said, "And this snowfall here is specially just for you alone, a ceremony of the highest honor from the mine-free peak to welcome you. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You wouldn't want your mother to suffer pain and agony because of you, would you? An exquisite beauty like you should not be treated harshly, isn't it?" A deathly pale white palm suddenly appeared out of nowhere right before her face, and it felt so icy cold like it was a hand from a dead corpse, which suddenly clamped over her eyes without any warning. It was just an instant when that hand released its grasp, and what was seen next was the sight of the young lady's long lashes lowered over her lightly shut eyes, her slender figure falling into the crook of a pale long arm. The snowfall at the Bright Moon Divine Temple lasted for about a quarter of an hour before it ceased, and the snow on the ground melted away very quickly. Very soon, not a single trace of it could be seen anymore. Like the snow that fell was just a mindless hallucination. At the intersecting borders in cloud heaven, the depth of the snow had reached a person's calf, and it did not look like it was showing any signs of letting up. Chapter 292. 1. You perverted man. If they had not summoned up their spirit powers to protect their bodies, it was feared that a good number of them would have frozen to death. Just when would this godforsaken weather come to a stop? Damn it! Cloud heaven does not even see such heavy snow in winter. It seemed like someone could not hold himself back any longer, and shouted out loudly. However, the very next instant after he vented out with that scream, he was immediately surrounded by the endless chill again, freezing him so badly that he shook and shivered, his words becoming unintelligible. "Young lord, it looks like the snow won't be letting up tonight. Why don't we leave and wait it out elsewhere for a while?" The tall thin man opened his mouth to suggest. The shade in Qing Yili's eyes deepened, but he did not speak. It was the woman who had half her face covered by her long hair that suddenly spoke out in a sarcastic voice. This heavy snow struck so suddenly and ferociously, without any signs or warning, like it's trying to cover up some incriminating evidence. I am afraid that by the time day breaks, some things would have changed completely. Hearing that, Qing Yili's face showed a slight ripple for an instant, like he had just thought of something, but quickly dismissed the idea. Hope he was just thinking too much. On the other side, Lu Junyao was held back by some matters, and he came to reach the Bright Moon Divine Temple more than 2 hours later than usual today. On his way here, He was still thinking that the little one might assume that he would not be coming tonight, and had gone to sleep early. That would give him the chance to go sneak up and make fun of her good and proper. But he had just set foot within the divine temple's premises when his footsteps immediately halted suddenly. Something did not feel right. It was clear to see that nothing had changed as far as he could see, but he could not help but sense there was something unusual in the air. The strange and familiar aura that did not belong here in the divine temple had grown very faint, almost completely dissipated. But he was born with senses that were more sensitive than others, and that was why he could still detect it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. So who was here earlier? Moreover, this person gave him a very dangerous feeling, making him feel a strong sense of unease. He had cloaked himself in invisibility, and no one was able to see him. Hence, he went walking slowly a step at a time, like he was in a place with no one around, treading step by step through the divine temple's exquisitely and elegantly constructed stone corridor that was shrouded in divine air. Like he was trying to decipher the footsteps taken by the young lady in his mind, to search for her. He slowly came to reach the place the young lady stayed at. He did not push on the door, but his body went on to seep right through that door like liquid. And what met his sight was the neatly stacked up bedclothes on the bed. Chapter 292. 2. You perverted man. He walked slowly over, his hand stretching out to touch them. It was cold to the touch. No one had laid on the bed since last night, where even the young lady's faintly fragrant scent had dissipated so much he almost could not detect it anymore. She has gone missing. His spiritual consciousness spread out hundreds of meters, and he still did not detect a single sliver of her presence anywhere. The pair of deep and mesmerizing violet orbs of Lu Junyao's slowly turned dark, a little bit at a time. He stood up from the edge of the bed, and the air around him felt grave and severe, feeling like one had gone down into a freezing cellar. Wait a minute. Lu Junyao's irises suddenly contracted, and his figure suddenly disappeared from its spot in that instant. When he reappeared, he was by the enormous lake in the divine temple, where there was a highly lifelike jade eagle carving with its wings widely spread, its noble head held high, and clear water cascaded down from its wide-open mouth. Lu Junyao walked over to stop right in front of the lake and crouched down, reaching a hand into the water, like he was feeling for something in there. Moments later, Lu Junyao pulled his hand out with a splash. In his hand that was dripping with water, and tied to a fine red string, hung a beautiful and exquisitely crafted blood-red ring that looked exactly the same as the one worn on the man's ring finger. That ring on his finger was the one that Qingyu removed from her neck and put on for him herself. She had said that this pair of rings had been hanging around her neck since her previous life, and although she did not know the ring's origins, they meant a lot to her and were something very dear to her, never once leaving her person. The fact that she had given him one signaled how important he was to her, and it was also a form of her acknowledgement of him. But now, this ring that was so important to her had actually been thrown into the lake. Lu Junyao's face turned frighteningly dark and forbidding, his clenched fist tightening around the ring he held in his palm, when he suddenly thought of something important. If he were to accidentally destroy the ring, being unable to hold back his strength in a fit of anger, that would cause him to suffer an irreplaceable loss. He then relaxed the grip of his hand and kept the ring safely in his robes before his chest. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The most important thing now was to find out where she is. Although he had a jolly good notion where in his heart, he needed an affirmative answer as soon as possible. On another side, after Qing Luo Yen returned back to her sleeping chambers, she gazed at the strangely shaped moon for a long while. For such a long period that she did not even notice that her neck had grown stiff and numb, before she then came back to her senses. Her lips stiffened at the corners, and she had just turned around when her eyes flared wide, startled by the sight of the man standing there, who had appeared all of a sudden from out of nowhere. Chapter 292. 3. You perverted man. Dark Lord. Why is he here? The man, who always wore a nonchalant smile on his face, was not showing the slightest sliver of mirth on his face at that moment. His severe violet eyes were looking emotionlessly at her as he asked her, "Where is Qingyu?" Upon hearing that, Qing Luoyan was taken aback, seemingly not understanding. "What did you say? I have no time to play along with your pretense here." The man's icy voice that did not carry a single hint of emotion rang out once again. But his figure that had been standing about 10 steps away from her earlier had moved to come right in front of her in a blink, his mouth opening to repeat, "Where is Qingyu?" Qing Luoyan laughed softly, her limpid almond shape narrowed up slightly. "The Dark Lord came here uninvited, barging right into my sleeping chambers so late at night to say such strange and preposterous things to me. This temple lord has yet to even place any blame on you, and you are instead questioning me. Has she been taken away?" The man's deep and mesmerizing eyes were staring fixedly right at her, his voice chillingly cold as he opened his mouth to ask once again. The expression on Qing Luoyan's face froze in surprise before she nodded her head slightly and replied, "Yes." "Who?" Lu Junyao's voice was deep, low and dangerous. Qing Luoyan was a little bewildered as she shook her head. "I do not know. What did that person look like?" "I was unable to see how he looked like. He was always shrouded in a layer of mist whenever he appeared, hazy and indistinct. He..." Qing Luoyan furrowed up her brows, looking like she was trying very hard to recall how the person looked like. "It was a young man. His powers, how does he compare to yours?" "I am not even a tenth of him," Qing Luoyan replied after deliberating on it for a moment. Mentioning that person, it seemed like she still felt some lingering fear and trepidation in her heart, not really daring to recall that memory, her mind subconsciously starting to resist remembering. Lu Junyao's lips curled up into a sneer, and with a derisive snort, he then turned around and left. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The doors of her sleeping chambers were suddenly blown open as a strong wind gushed inside. A bone-tingling chill caused Qing Luoyan to feel a shiver run down her spine, and she suddenly snapped wide awake. "What just happened?" She raised her eyes and looked outside the doors that had been blown wide open, to see a tall and well-built figure gradually walking further and further away, till it disappeared from sight. It was not known how long she had been slipping in and out of hazy unconsciousness. When Qingyu opened her eyes again, she found that she was hurting everywhere on her body. That feeling was worse than the pain one felt after being heavily injured in a fight. Chapter 292. 4. You perverted man. Because though she was hurting everywhere, there was clearly not a single sign of injury anywhere on her body, and she had not shed a single drop of blood at all. Her eyes were wide open when she remembered the mysterious man who had suddenly appeared. Could he have employed the use of some evil technique to inflict such torment on her? Her entire body was soaking in some kind of red liquid right at that moment, the water reaching just below her shoulders. Her feet seemed to be bound by something, preventing her from moving in the slightest. However, her hands were free, but she was just unable to get out of that pool of water. Looking at that red liquid, Qingyu knitted up her brows in disdain. The smell told her it was not blood, nor was there any strange scent coming from it. But it could not be anything good from the looks of it, and it was rather disturbing to see as well. It wouldn't be some kind of evil concoction that dissolves a person's cultivation powers, would it? Thinking about that, Qingyu's brows could not help but furrow up more deeply. She tried to move her feet, but felt as if they were held down by something that was 1,000 caddies in weight, rendering her helpless. There was nothing she could do but to give up. She subconsciously felt around her body, and when she came to touch her neck, she suddenly froze. It seemed like she had suddenly recalled something. "Oh, looks like you are carrying a rather amazing little thing on you, isn't it? Unfortunately, you cannot bring it along with you." The man's melodious voice was mirthful as it rang out softly, and something around her neck then seemed to slip off, before it was tossed a far way out, not making a single sound when it landed. Damn it! Qingyu's brows knitted up tightly, and her hands clenched up. Never had she thought that that perverted guy would come to discover that little thing she had kept close to her body for so many years, and he had even tossed it away. The thing she was worried about now was Lu Junyao, as he must have discovered that she had gone missing, and she really did not know what kind of a rage he would fly into. But she believed that the fellow would probably have guessed that she had been taken away, but was just unable to locate her at this moment. Everything had happened too quickly, and no one could have expected that these people would make their move so quickly. She did not even know how she was brought here out of the blue, but that just told her that that man was really very powerful. "Little burrow," she called out silently in her heart, but did not get any kind of response. "Little imp," she tried to call out to the other one, the little thing who claimed he was the heavenly insights into medicine's book spirit. However, haha, see, she just knew that he wasn't all that dependable. In regards to these two who would always be like an unhinged chain at the most critical periods, hasn't she gotten used to that yet? Qingyu let out a gloomy sigh before she surveyed her surroundings to determine what kind of a place she was at. It looked as if she was in some sort of a prison. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, but everything she could see was all red in color. Even the door of her prison cell was red. Every single metal bar on the door that was as thick as a baby's arm seemed strong and sturdy. One that looked impossible to open through brute strength alone. There should be some kind of a hidden switch somewhere. Lowering her eyes, she peered towards the bottom of the pool. Two metal ring-shaped things were clamped around her ankles, and Qingyu struggled a little out of frustration before she sent a bolt of golden red spirit energy out from her palm that hurtled ferociously towards the metal ring. But before it could strike the metal ring, it was suddenly halted by a force that suddenly appeared. Qingyu was taken aback, and before she could even react, she heard the same familiar melodious voice sound out beside her ear. "You don't want your foot anymore?" Qingyu raised her head up with a snap, and immediately saw that a tall figure had appeared right before her, looking down at her from a higher vantage point. Chapter 293. 1. Heart feels gloomy and don't feel well all over, but this time, he no longer looked indistinct and hazy like before. The man's countenance fully revealed before her eyes. Qingyu's first reaction upon seeing that face was to think that such a godly man who was enveloped in such a great air of divinity could possibly exist. Dressed in full green robes, it gave a man a look of clean and clear elegance, just like the refreshing smile on his face that felt like a spring breeze. His countenance exquisite, and his facial features splendid and magnificent, like a figure that came straight out of a painting of a divine being. However, though the man possessed extremely dazzling looks, Qingyu did not have any good feelings towards him. She then went on to say with a sneer, "I had thought that you looked too ugly to be seen." The man let out a soft low laugh, as if he thought it was rather inconvenient to be speaking from that position. He then squatted down by the edge of the pool, and said to her with the corners of his lips lifted, "It makes me wonder if my looks has come to have tainted the eyes of the poor little one here? You're the poor little thing." Qingyu furrowed up her brows, and said as she glared at the man out of the corner of her eyes. Lu Junyao had often liked to call her a little one as well, and hearing it from Lu Junyao merely made them seem more intimate, but when it came out from this strange man's mouth, it just made her feel uneasy all over. "Ha! I'm not really little anymore. Even your mother is littler than I am. So doesn't that make you a little one here before me?" The man seemed to find her rather interesting, and he spoke to her with a smile on his face all this time. Hearing him mention her mother, Qingyu's eyes could not help but turn dark. "What do you people really want? Since you've already taken me captive, then there is no need for my mother to remain here anymore, right? What a naive little thing you are," the man said with a laugh as he shook his head. "Your mother is one of our own people here in the mine Free Peak, and she belongs to this place itself. Similarly, that means you belong to this place as well. The divine realm of legend is actually just a place filled with a whole bunch of people who commit such despicable and dastardly deeds in secret." Qingyu retorted with a sneer, her voice dripping with contempt. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. You do not need to try to get me agitated with your words. It's no use, the man said with a soft laugh, and then stretched his hand out to caress her face. It made the skin on Qingyu's scalp crawl, her eyes gazing warily at the man. "Be good and just remain here. Do not even dream of escaping from here, or attempt to remove the bindings around your ankles." Speaking up to that point, The man suddenly pretended to be deep in thought for a moment with a pregnant pause, and then turned to peer into the reddish water at her feet. She wouldn't really be that unlucky, would she? If what this man said was true, then didn't she very nearly maim herself, and she would have been crippled for life. That was a really close shave. Qingyu was still feeling a little shocked and traumatized, but was also cursing at the man in her heart at the same time. People from this place were not only sick in the mind, even the artifacts they used were just as perverted as them. Chapter 293. 2. Heart feels gloomy, and don't feel well. All overseeing the series of changes and expressions that came over the young lady's face, the man could not help but smile. He then stood up and then said with a faint smile, "After you have absorbed all the power from the water in this pool, that will be the time that you shall really be of good use." Immediately after saying that, he did not even wait for Qingyu to open her mouth, but just disappeared from his spot. "Hey, don't leave yet. I have not finished." Qingyu glared at that empty spot that the man had suddenly disappeared from, unable to help herself but feel anger and frustration well up. She had not heard a single whisper from anyone for the better half of a day, and after finally being able to see someone, he actually just went ahead to leave like that, before she was able to ask him anything. Qingyu clenched her jaws tight as her arms at the sides of her body that were free from any bonds smacked the water furiously in frustration. The water splashed up to a great height, and then fell back down to drench her entire head. Her hair dripping wet. The young lady's face was at a complete loss, and it looked as if she was going to burst into tears from her own stupidity on this one rare occasion. Arg, what a jerk! Was she going to be imprisoned here forever? It was not known when the snow stopped, and the sky was slowly beginning to brighten. The strange thing was, after the snow stopped, the snow that had piled up almost to knee height was actually disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it was all gone in just a short while, making everyone unable to help but to think that the snow that fell for the entire night had merely just been an illusion. "Everyone look! What is that?" Following someone's loud exclamation of surprise, everyone looked in the direction that person was pointing into, to gaze into the still slightly dim sky that hadn't fully turned to light, where it looked like the faint shape of something was seemingly slowly being revealed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was indistinct and hazy, but the faint outline of some highly majestic and toweringly grand architecture could just be made out, surrounded by layer upon layer of fluffy clouds, where only a part of the building could be seen, but it was already an astounding sight. "Is that the Mind-Free Peak?" Someone said in a trembling voice, like he was finding it hard to hide the excitement in his heart. "It showed up. It's finally showing up. 1,000-year wait. And to be able to see this scene once again, one can really die without any regrets." That was an old and highly wizened voice, and it could be seen it came from the figure of a short old man who was thin as sticks, his dry and wrinkled eyes brimming with hot tears, as he gazed fixedly at the mysterious building that was gradually becoming revealed, his eyes unwavering, like he was afraid if he even blinked, the thing would suddenly disappear from his sight. Chapter 293. 3. Heart feels gloomy, and don't feel well. All over this old man was one of the slightly more elderly ones among those who have lived past the grand 1,000-year mark in Cloud Heaven, and he was considerably well known by people. His cultivation was not really considered to be at the forefront in Cloud Heaven, but he possessed strong and great mental powers, a highly outstanding artifact cultivator, having refined powerful artifacts for a good number of famous experts before, a highly revered individual. Back in his younger days, he originally had a chance to go into the Mind-Free Peak, but it was not known what went wrong with the particular spirit artifact he was refining, which turned out to have absorbed a great amount of evil energy, which caused the blood and qi in his body to reverse its flow, almost costing him his very life. Fortunately, in the end, one of his disciples saw it and managed to save him. But after that, the after effects became chronic, and his body was not as healthy as before, deteriorating to the point where he was able to refine one spirit artifact every 3 days in the past to become capable of only one spirit artifact a month. Luckily, he had two very outstanding disciples who fully inherited all his knowledge and talent in artifact refinement, and he did not have to worry that his unique skills would die out and become lost to the world. Even though he looked to be treading into the final days of his life, he still yearned to go in there to see the place, as the missed opportunity back then had been one of his biggest regrets throughout his life, and he would not be able to rest in peace if he still have not seen the place with his own eyes. How? I haven't asked you to make a wasted trip, right? Seeing Zhuge Xiong's flabbergasted look on his face, Qing Tianlin curved up his lips and said with a laugh. Zhuge Xiong nodded his head dazedly. It's really so amazing. After a strange bout of heavy snow, it then appeared right after that. The Mind-Free Peak is really a realm of divinity, hence its manifestation is accompanied by such a bizarre meteorological phenomenon. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Speaking about that, Zhuge Xiong could not help but feel rather puzzled. But, how are we going to be able to go there? It looks like it's so high up and far away from us. Are we supposed to fly our way up there? Hearing that, Qing Tianlin could not help feeling a twitch tug at the corner of his mouth, before he went on to force a smile on his face and said, "The time is not yet ripe, so it will naturally not show itself fully. There is no need to be so anxious." Zhuge Xiong then nodded his head woodenly, not fully understanding everything. Everyone stayed put at that place, their hearts filled with excited anticipation. Even though it had snowed heavily the entire night, and the freezing temperature had almost frozen them half to death, all of that was not enough to dampen all the heated passion and anticipation they were all feeling. And in a tent sitting slightly further away, in contrast to the raucous cheers that eruption all around, it was solemn and quiet in there, like there hadn't been much movement from that tent all the way from last night. Chapter 293. 4. Heart feels gloomy, and don't feel well. All over there was a group of about 7 or 8 brawny, well-built men in severe black battle gear inside, seated cross-legged in a half-lotus position on the ground. A handsome-looking man in blue robes was in the tent pacing in a circle, and he looked a little anxious. "Lord Sun Luo, can you not walk here and there already? You've been pacing around for the entire night. Aren't you tired? Even if you're not tired, I am starting to get dizzy here." Finally, one of the black-robed men could not help but to speak up in an emotionless voice. "It's been so long and not a single person has brought us any news, and only told us to wait. How long do we have to wait until? The Mind-Free Peak is about to manifest right before our eyes, so how could he not be anxious at all? Doesn't he see how many people there are out there?" Just as Sun Luo's good-looking face was looking all creased up with anxiety, the faces of the group of men seated cross-legged on the ground suddenly turned serious, and they uniformly shot right to their feet, their voices ringing out respectfully in unison. "Overlord!" Sun Luo's mouth suddenly clamped shut, and after being stunned for a few more seconds, he immediately put on a smiling face and walked over closer to the man who just arrived. "My lord has finally come back. I was really going to go out and look for you if you still did not come back." The tall and well-built man who appeared in the tent turned out to be none other than Lu Junyao himself. He peered through a gap from inside the tent to check out the situation in the sky as he asked, "What's the situation like on this side?" "It snowed for the entire night, and it suddenly stopped just a while ago. The snow disappeared very quickly, and not the slightest wetness was left behind, the ground becoming cleaner than it was before." Oh, it's really just as he had thought. The reason for the sudden snowfall was really an attempt to conceal evidence of some nefarious deed, and throughout the entire cloud heaven, it snowed only here and in the Bright Moon Divine Temple. He didn't even need to guess that these two incidents were linked in some way. Qingyu must have been taken away while it snowed, and the snowfall was not some strange phenomenon, but was caused by the hand of a person. Lu Junyao clenched his fists up tightly, his eyes turning so deep it was terrifying to see. If the Felis dares to do anything to her. "I heard Lotus Supreme Godly King brought back a very beautiful-looking little lass." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When Inggo was passing by a certain location, she suddenly heard 2 female divine envoys talking to each other, and for some unknown reason, her footsteps came to a furtive halt. "Teehee, so what?" There are so many beautiful divine envoys here in the mind-free peak. Which one among us has ever caught the Lotus Supreme Godly King's eye? That is the high and mighty Lord Godly King you're talking about. An entity one can only look at and never dream to covet. That's not what I mean. What I mean to say is that I accidentally saw how that little lass looked like earlier, and I can't help but feel that she looked very much like that person in the flame-devouring ice demon. On her cold and expressionless face, Ingu, who was actually just about to leave, suddenly widened her eyes. What? Chapter 294. 1. Stares that disappeared. A little lass, who looked very much like Senior. Could it be? Ing's fingers clenched up tightly, and her usually cold and indifferent face immediately became grave in an instant. Shh! Do not say such things so carelessly. That person in the flame-devouring ice demon must not be mentioned so casually. Be very careful not to let anyone overhear you, or it will only invite disaster. I know that. The two women continued to whisper for a while more, and they left the place a few moments later. Ingu then came walking out from the shadows and gazed into the direction those two women left, her brows knitted together. What should she do? If things were really like what she thought, she really wonders what kind of extreme measures her senior would take if she found out. Her body was already so badly weakened, she would most probably crumble and collapse if she came to receive this news. After all, she did not care what kind of an end she would finally come to meet, but her husband and her children were the only people she still cared about. If anything were to happen to them, the agony inflicted on her would feel to be 100 times worse. With Senior's strong-headed personality, who would rather break the jade than keep a tile intact. Thinking about that, Ingu could not help but let out a soft sigh before she went walking off towards another direction. Sovereign, the Lotus Supreme Godly King is here. A woman standing at the side in waiting saw the person walking in, and immediately went on to announce. The woman, who was dozing off as she leaned back in the chair of the raised pedestal, then raised her eyes when she heard the announcement. Her silver irises indifferent, without a single ripple of emotion in them, as she gazed at the person coming in, and then raised a hand up to signal to the woman standing beside her that she was dismissed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Seeing that, the woman bowed her head slightly and retreated out from the place. Sovereign really lives up to her name. It looks as though you are forever so calm no matter what happens. The person who came in laughed softly, his voice elegantly melodious, as he made his own way over to a comfortable-looking soft lounge and laid himself down on his own accord. His slanted eyes slightly narrowed into contented slits, looking very much like a graceful and tame leopard, but could turn dangerous at any moment. Throughout the entire mind-free peak, only one person dared to be so willful and impudent before this most highly revered woman, but would still be indulged. The woman's exquisite countenance did not show any change in her expression, but a corner of her lips tugged ever so slightly before she went on to say in a nonchalant voice, "Why is the Lord Supreme Lotus not toying with his new little pet, but has instead come here to my place to idle away like this?" Chapter 294. 2. Stares that disappeared. Nothing truly escapes your eyes. The man lifted a corner of his lips, and then raised his eyes up to look at her with an indiscernible smile. That little one is really very interesting. Does Sovereign want to go have a look? Huh? The woman scoffed softly, her eyes throwing him a glance that carried a hint of warning in them. You'd better not play too much, and end up impeding with what's important. I know my priorities. Lianshe replied with a faint smile, suddenly seeming like he just thought of something. He then raised an eyebrow, and said with a voice that hid an underlying meaning, "With the one in the flame-devouring ice demon together with the little one I brought back, we've now gathered the people we need." Seeing that Sovereign is still not making any moves, I wonder if you have something ingenious up your sleeve, or could it be you're still waiting for some other important person to appear? The woman's emotionless eyes glanced at him, and it was quite a long while before her lips parted to say, "You know many things, don't you? Ho ho, if not, how am I qualified to continue to remain being the popular right-hand man of sovereigns?" Lianshe shrugged his shoulders, and then got up lazily from the soft lounge, his demeanor a little helpless. It would be great if Sovereign would one day come to deem it fit to say a few more words to me. So beautiful, but you're so cold and aloof. It's really hurtful. Upon saying that, the man's tall figure that carried a nonchalant air, then left from there without turning his head back even once. In a blink, the figure was suddenly 100 meters distance away, and when one took another look, there was already no sign of him anywhere. The woman on top of the raised pedestal stared outside the palace, at the empty space without the presence of a single person, and her silver eyes then seemed to flash with a strange glint for an instant. On another side, at the intersecting borders of cloud heaven, the sky had already turned bright and sunny, and at the edge of the clouds, the faint and indistinct corner of the architecture building that had manifested earlier had now become clearer. But the strange thing was that the building seemed like it was just an illusory mirage, indistinct and hazy to the eye, sometimes even disappearing from sight for a while before it would show itself once again, strange and one of a kind. But that just made it feel even more mysterious and unfathomable, grabbing everyone's attention. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU my lord, someone wants to see you. A corner of the tent flap was lifted up, and a disciple of the Dark Lands came walking in, a lean-figured youth trailing just behind him. He was dressed in battle gear, his countenance gentle and exquisite, and it turned out he was Qing Bei, who had not been seen for quite a long time. Lu Junyao's brows furrowed together subconsciously. How did you manage to find your way here? I am able to gain knowledge of anything I want to know naturally. Qing Bei did not bother with that displeased look on the man's face, and just went on ahead to walk inside to find himself a place to sit down, looking like he had no intentions of leaving from there. Chapter 294. 3. Stares that disappeared. Seeing that the atmosphere did not feel right, the disciple from the Dark Lands who led the way quickly made his way out from there, in order to not stir up the other fish in the pond. Hearing the youth's words, Lu Junyao scoffed coldly and said, "Kid, haven't seen you for a period, and it seems you've become more willful. The matter about Qing Yu having been captured, you should tell my father about it, and not continue to choose to hide it. We are after all her blood kin, and we have the right to know her whereabouts." The youth had his eyes narrowed, his tone emotionless as he spoke slowly, pausing between each and every word. But the heavy and severe aura around him could be felt clearly, which showed that he was not in a very good mood at that moment. "So what if I tell you guys about it?" Lu Junyao said with a scoffing laugh, and then arched up an eyebrow, his mesmerizing violet eyes looking at the youth as he said, "Not only will you guys unable to save her, you will only add on to my worries, so there is no need for me to tell you." Qing Bei stared at the man with mildly angry eyes, but could not find the words to rebut him at that moment. "You guys do not need to worry about Qing Yu, and you just need to return to the Divine Healer sect to accompany your father, as I will naturally make sure I bring my people back safe and sound." As Lu Junyao spoke, he called out towards the outside of the tent, and the Dark Lands disciple who had gone out earlier came back in, and said respectfully, "My lord, what are your orders?" "Escort him back to the Divine Healer sect, and his safety must be ensured." Seeing that, Qing Bei knitted up his brows. "I am not going back. I want to go to the mine-free peak." "You?" Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow, looking somewhat skeptical. "You're sure you're not just sending yourself into the wolf's den? Stop looking down on people like that. Although you are very strong, there will always be things that even you are incapable of. I have very strong sensory powers which has earned Qing Yu's praise before. As long as I want to, I am able to acquire knowledge of things that others have no way of knowing about. I will definitely be of help if you take me with you." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU my cultivation might not be able to match up to yours at all now, but who knows what kind of changes will happen in the future. I will definitely catch up with you in time. Qing Bei's face was serious as he looked at the man to say. Seeing that, Lu Junyao seemed to be moved by the youth's earnest persistence, as he clasped his hand to his forehead in helplessness, and let out a soft sigh. "All right, I'll agree to it, but you will have to follow my instructions, and not act on your own. Otherwise, I will have you thrown back to the divine healer sect. All right. I will not act rashly, Qingbei replied. The Mind-Free Peak really lived up to its name as the Divine Realm, as its magnetism felt really special and unique. Before this, Cloud Heaven, which had been thought to be the highest level realm, was already a place that many people were unable to reach, but there was actually another realm that was filled with so much mystery and unimaginable power beyond it. Chapter 294. 4. Stairs that disappeared after a strange and mystifying bout of snowfall that happened unexpectedly out of the blue. Though a tip of the iceberg was revealed and became visible to the naked eye, the place still looked so unreal and far away. But as time trickled by, the mysterious veil shrouding the place seemed to be becoming uncovered a little bit at a time. Around that majestic and imposing architecture, its hazy shroud seemed to be turning faint slowly, as the entire shape of the Mind-Free Peak gradually came to be revealed. And when the entire place appeared unobstructed before everyone, their eyes were all once again stunned wide, their mouths agape. Towering just at the edge of the clouds was a glimmering palace that shone like it was built out of clear crystalline crystals, the sunlight scintillating through the magnificent structure in myriad colorful beams. A sight so beautiful it felt as if they were caught in a dream, and it was just an illusion that might probably all disappear in a blink. Someone was unable to hold in the excitement in his heart when he saw the glass-like stairs that cascaded down from the edge of the structure, and his body immediately went charging straight towards it, like he wanted to be the first to scale the steps. Of course, that man was not the only one to do that. Seeing that someone had made a move before them, they were naturally not going to fall behind, and immediately went chasing after the person. But something unexpected happened all of a sudden. The first person who went charging onto the stairs suddenly let out a mournful wail, as his body went plummeting downwards in a fall, to disappear without a trace in a blink. Everyone turned their eyes to look, and they discovered that the glass steps have suddenly disappeared. The people who were following closely behind scrambled to halt their feet when they saw that, their faces turning pale as death, like their souls had almost left their bodies as they stared at the scene that had unfolded right before their eyes. But they were all also silently rejoicing that they had been a step slower, otherwise they would have died such an ignoble and senseless death. But why did the stairs suddenly disappear out of the blue? When everyone turned their eyes to look again, they discovered that the stairs were there, back in place. But that guy who had stepped onto those stairs just now had clearly fallen from those steps when they suddenly disappeared, to die for absolutely nothing. What exactly is happening here? With a prior example for everyone to see, no one else dared to go charging up so brashly, but began to discuss with each other for a solution with grim faces. Could those steps be merely just an illusion? They are just a fragment of our imagination, and do not actually exist in reality. Zhuge Xiong started to say, as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Not necessarily. The Mind-Free Peak wouldn't need to use such a trick to toy with us like that. But there is indeed something strange about those stairs, and we will not be able to scale them through conventional methods. Qing Tianlin curved up his lips into a smile and said. Hearing that, Zhuge Xiong arched up an eyebrow to look at the man. What great solution do you have in mind? Qing Tianlin shrugged his shoulders. I have not come up with a solution yet. After all, only one person has tried to go up, all of it happening before anyone could do anything, and I was unable to even get a good look. That is so simple, Zhuge Xiong said with a laugh, and then raised a hand to point nonchalantly at a person. You, go climb those stairs and show me. The face of the Hunters Guild member that got pointed out immediately turned white from fear, his head shaking like a child's toy drum as he stammered in horror. Guild Chief, I do not dare to. I'm scared I'll die. Chapter 295. 1. The road to the Divine Realm is filled with difficulties. Upon hearing that, Zhuge Xiong arched up an eyebrow, the expression on his face sinister as he stared at the man. You dare to defy my orders? When the man saw that, his body quivered like a leaf, and his forehead seemed to shimmer with a sheen of cold sweat. Zhuge Xiong became more infuriated hearing the man's reply. To think that his hunter's guild had such a timid and cowardly fella. An absolute disgrace. So many people from the various powers are all here watching. And if this fella really doesn't make his way up there, wouldn't he lose face completely before them? When that thought came to mind, Zhuge Xiong's face grew grim and he shouted coldly, "If you do not get that sorry behind up there this instant, I will kill you right this moment. Don't be so rash. We're just getting someone to go test it out a bit, and not to send them to their death. Who will dare to go if you say it like that?" Qing Tianlin said with a laugh as he held back the furious Zhuge Xiong, and then turned to look at the ashen-faced man who was looking wrought with terror, to say with a gentle smile, "You do not have to worry about a thing. I will teach you how you can do it, which will definitely keep you alive." The man was a little dazed as he looked at that gentle and handsome countenance, one who made people feel was extremely friendly and highly affable. He seemed to have suddenly forgotten his fear, as he nodded his head as if possessed. "All right." He was then seen going slowly towards the glass stairs. Zhuge Xiong's eyes widened in surprise, and then suddenly seemed to dawn upon him, his face immediately showing a contemptuous smile. Qing Tianlin watched the man raise his foot to tread onto the first step, and his thin lips parted slightly as he coaxed, "Go up to the second step." It looked as if the man was a puppet on strings as his foot raised up very highly, before it landed on the second step of the stairs. He then stood dazedly on the step, foolishly waiting for the next command. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was just as he thought. Qing Tianlin had used his puppetry on his subordinate. Otherwise, how could the man's expression possibly remain so calm, suddenly agreeing to court his own death so readily? Zhuge Xiong could not help but sigh inwardly when that thought came into his mind, feeling that this man here was really becoming more and more unfathomable, his cultivation of his puppetry technique having reached unimaginable levels. Fortunately for him, they were not on opposing sides. "Now take another couple of steps up. Keep your feet steady, and do not stop in between," Qing Tianlin said in a soft voice. Immediately after hearing that, everyone saw the man standing on the steps whose movements had been stiff and awkward earlier suddenly become highly agile, clearing 2 steps on the stairs at a time, his feet taking him about 6 steps up. However, just as he raised his foot to take another step, something seemed to fly very rapidly through the air, and before anyone could see what it was that struck, their ears immediately heard a heavy dull thud. Chapter 295. 2. The road to the divine realm is filled with difficulties. The next thing their eyes saw was the man who had been climbing up the stairs had suddenly fallen down. A pool of blood was spreading out under his body. It was seen that his head had gone missing, bright red blood spurting copiously out through the garish wound, having died a horrible death. Everyone's face immediately turned pale. What was that? Was it a bird? It seemed like it was so small and tiny, but it was actually able to swallow up a man's head in a mere instant. Many voices immediately broke out in furious debate, and the shade of Zhuge Xiong's face could not look any uglier. The man who died had been his subordinate after all. It had all seemed to be going very well, and no one had expected that things would take such a sudden turn. Qing Tianlin had also furrowed up his brows as he looked at the headless corpse on the ground, the look on his face grim. Just what could have gone wrong? It had all been going so well. What made that strange thing appear all of a sudden out of nowhere? With another person dead, it made everyone become more restless and antsy, even if some had been feeling bold enough to step up to give it a try before. After suddenly seeing such a brutal beast appear, all of them had immediately pushed any ideas they had out from their minds. They truly wanted to go up there, as who wouldn't want to gain more resources that would enable them to take a great leap forward towards greater power. But before that, they must first ensure that they are still alive to enjoy it. "Young lord, why not let me go give it a try?" the sweet and petite little young girl said as she looked up at him, the look on her face looking rather innocent and naive. "Little Yen, don't start. Didn't you see that 2 grown men have lost their lives? You might possibly stand a slight chance if it was you at night. The daytime you does not possess enough fighting ability," the tall thin man said teasingly, Hearing that, the young girl called Little Yen immediately knitted up her brows in a huff, glaring at the man as she said, "Are you looking down on me? I am not. I am merely just stating the facts. A little girl like you should not come try to mess things up any further." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Little Yen was so infuriated she ignored him completely, and ran a few short steps over to Qing Yili to say, "Young lord, let me go give it a try. I will be very careful." Qing Yili lowered his eyes and cast his indifferent gaze onto her before he opened his mouth to say, "I will not let my people go risk themselves like that. Don't worry, there will be more people who will not be able to hold themselves back very soon. How are you doing staying in here?" A cold voice tinged with a slight raspiness suddenly sounded. Qing Lanfei was taken aback a moment, and she then raised her head. Chapter 295. 3. The road to the divine realm is filled with difficulties with a head of full silver hair right before her. The woman with an exquisite countenance was clearly her master, the nightmarish soul deity Yen Pe, whom any person from the mind-free peak that committed any wrongdoing would be handed over to. But it was this person who was in charge of meting out punishment that produced a traitorous disciple, causing her to be highly talked about for a very long period of time. Qing Lanfei propped herself up with her palms and struggled for a while to stand up. Thick and heavy chains bound both her hands and feet, and they clattered loudly as she tried to stand. It could be seen that her wrists were bruised and swollen from being heavily bound for a long period, and it looked especially garish against her skin that was otherwise smooth and fair as snow. "Master, I am well." Qing Lanfei's lips parted as she said softly. If one was to disregard her pale lips that did not show a single tinge of color, she did indeed look to be fine. Yen Po's lips stiffened slightly. "You're still as strong-headed as ever." The expression on Qing Lanfei's face was a little scornful as she went on to say, "I am afraid that Master did not come here today just to see how I am doing, are you?" "That is indeed the case. I came here because I wanted to tell you something." When those words came out, the expression on Ing Ji's face, who had been standing quietly behind with her head lowered, suddenly changed, as she looked at Qing Lanfei a little anxiously. "Is Master really going to?" Upon hearing that, Qing Lanfei's face did not change much but remained rather calm as she asked, "What is it?" Seeing how indifferent and disinterested she looked, Yenpa could not help but curl up her lips as she stretched her hand out and threw something onto the ground. Qing Lanfei subconsciously turned to look and was stunned into a daze. It was a small and delicate little herb pouch. Qing Lanfei reached her hands out to snatch it up. Holding it in her hands, she opened it gently. There were bits of crushed herbs in there, which gave out a light faint fragrance. But that was not the most important thing in there. Inside the herb pouch, there was a small lock of hair. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Black and fine. For some unknown reason, as Qing Lanfei stared at the lock of hair, her fingers holding it started to tremble slightly. "This is... Can't you feel it?" Yenpa said with a laugh. "The familiar aura bonded in blood. I don't think you need me to spell it out." Qing Lanfei looked up in utter disbelief, her eyes wide as she said slowly, gritting her teeth with every word, "Have you people captured my daughter?" Sigh. Seeing the woman look like she was becoming almost maniacal, Yen Po's eyes was tinged with a sliver of pity. "Since you already have the answer in your heart, do you need to persist in questioning so relentlessly? However, the deed isn't done by my hand, as the mind-free peak is filled with many others who seek to earn merit, coveting for more outstanding and powerful weapons. I've said before that none of you will be able to escape this fate. If you had paid heed to my words back then, you would not have come to such an end now." Chapter 295. 4. The road to the divine realm is filled with difficulties. Have you people done anything to her? How is she now? What have you done to her? Qing Lanfei's eyes had turned bloodshot. Seeming not caring about the heavy bindings tethered around all four of her limbs, she was maniacally just trying to attack the woman standing calmly in front of her. But the area she was able to reach was limited after all. the length of the metal chains reaching just a half step away from the silver-haired woman, not allowing her to take another step forward. The sore and tender flesh at the areas around Qing Lanfei's wrists and ankles had rubbed against the metal chains, so much they were starting to bleed a little. But she did not seem to feel any pain, as she continued to struggle violently. The blood flowing out from her wounds at her wrists and ankles grew more and more, and Yanpa could not help but knit up her brows. She stretched her hand out and touched Qing Lanfei lightly on the forehead, and Qing Lanfei's body suddenly went stiff for an instant, before her eyes closed as she slumped to the ground. As obstinate as ever, Yanpa scoffed coldly, and then turned around to walk away without looking back, leaving Yingge to stand there stunned, her face worried as she looked at the woman slumped on the ground. "Yingge, what are you doing standing there in a daze? Aren't you leaving?" Seeing that the girl did not follow, Yanpa could not help but to call out to her. "Master, she has been imprisoned here in the flame-devouring ice demon for such a long time. Her cultivation must have depleted completely. Not that she is losing so much blood, if we just leave her alone like this." Yingge paused warily for a moment when she spoke up till that point, but then continued on to say, "She is still useful, and if anything were to happen to her, Sovereign might come to blame it on you." Yanpa deliberated on it for a while, and seemed to think that Yingge's words made some sense. She then knitted up her brows before saying to the girl, "Then tend to her wounds for her a bit." Delight rose in Yingge's heart upon hearing that, but her face showed nothing at all. "Yes, master." The instant Yanpa left, Yingge quickly tended to Qing Lanfei's injuries, and when she saw the wounds at the ends of her limbs, Yingge's heart winced with pain. Yingge had been worrying about how she should break the news to her senior, that her daughter had been brought to the mine-free peak. Never had she expected that master would come to tell her about it instead. It was probably because she really cared about her daughter too much, and that was why her senior immediately lost her mind upon seeing a lock of hair. Actually, nothing has really happened to that little lass, but it was just that she was not exactly in a very good situation as well. Yingge sighed softly to herself. Looks like she will have to think of a way to go see that little lass. Anyone who came to be soaked in water for such a long period of time could not possibly be feeling all that great anyway. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Moreover, it wasn't just regular water, but was red like blood. Who knew what manner of things had been added into it? However, the strange thing was that her cultivation had not shown any signs of deteriorating, but she could faintly feel it becoming stronger instead. Qingyu raised her head and looked around above her head out of boredom, but she seemed to discover something from that one gaze. The structure above her seemed to be hard and unyielding glacial rock, its exterior looking like ice, but was actually a unique material that was more impenetrable than bronze or iron. A twitch immediately tugged at a corner of her mouth in a mirthless smile. Just how worried are they of her escaping? Aren't they thinking too highly of her? Chapter 296. 1. I just wanted some fresh air, not to escape. That perverted man had captured her and brought her here, but had not used any form of torture on her or done anything untoward against her, ordering people to take good care of all her meals and drinks instead. Besides being imprisoned in this place where her movement was restricted, she was treated very well. It will be naive to think that she had been brought here as a guest. This pool of water. Qingyu's eyes narrowed slightly, and then spread her palm open. A reddish curled-up ball materialized on her hand, seemingly soundly asleep. Upon seeing that, Qingyu curled up a corner of her lips as she snorted derisively. Turning her palm over, that red ball immediately fell into the pool. In a moment of shock and panic, a gurgling sound was heard, and it swallowed several mouthfuls of water. Ugh! Cough, cough, cough. Cough, cough. In the span of a few breaths' time, a red-topped head popped out through the surface of the water, sputtering and dripping wet. Its small, tender-skinned face twisted up from choking as tears streamed down his face, and frightfully pitiful sight. However, the culprit continued to stare expressionlessly down at him, without the slightest hint of remorse on her face. The little thing had initially been about to jump up in thunderous rage, but when he saw the expressionless face looking straight at him, He immediately hung his head timidly and said in a soft voice, Mistress, what are your orders? So you still realize that I'm your mistress? Qingyu stiffened up a corner of her lips in a disdainful smirk, her voice scornful. Of course I know that. You are my one and only mistress, my savior and benefactor, who pulled me out of untold misery. His tone of voice was highly worked up, like he was eager to profess his loyalty to her. Qingyu arched up an eyebrow, knowing that the little fellow was referring to the time when he was still just a seed and was trapped in the cover of the heavenly insights into medicine, where he came to be freed by a single drop of her blood. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When that thought came to mind, she suddenly smiled and her eyes glinted meaningfully as she said, Good that you remember that, because it is now your turn to save me from misery and calamity. Hearing that, the red-colored little creature transformed from a earth-fire devil vine, then blinked his eyes in bewilderment before he asked, In what way can I be of assistance to my mistress? Of course you can. At this moment, I can only depend on you. Qingyu curved up her lips and said, I heard that creatures like you thrive among the lava rocks at the Earth's core, which make your bodies impenetrable by sword or spear, and are highly resilient against all sorts of attacks. That is a matter of fact, of course. We earth-fire devil vines are the strongest and most powerful species among all plants, and humans have even used us to forge as weapons as well. Upon hearing how he was praised, the little creature could not help getting excited and stoked, his face flushing a rosy red. Chapter 296. 2. I just wanted some fresh air. Not to escape. Qingyu immediately thought that it was rather funny. This little fellow would have lived for more than 10,000 years at least, but his mind was still so much like a little child. Since you're so powerful, then you can help me with something now. Upon saying that, Qingyu drew a finger lightly over her palm, and a tiny cut appeared on her hand, where a drop of bright red blood quickly beaded. The little creature's eyes widened in surprise. Mistress, why did you do that? Here, swallow it. Qingyu then said, extending her palm forward. But her actions caused the little creature, whose face was already filled with shock, to scuttle away and hide in a corner in terror. Mistress, I've realized what I've done wrong. What wrong have you done? Qingyu raised an eyebrow quizzically. Everything I've done is wrong. Can you not punish me? The little creature glanced at the droplet of blood on her palm. His lips pursed up in horror. Qingyu was taken aback by his reaction, but then suddenly recalled that though her blood was extremely good for many things, it could be highly lethal to some demonic creatures at times. For instance, the blood that flowed in her when she was greatly enraged would hold some kind of highly destructive power, and anyone who touched it would die. Qingyu could not help but laugh out loud, and the expression on her face softened slightly. Don't worry. I only want you to break a hole through the ceiling above me. As she spoke, she raised her other hand up and pointed above her head. Hearing that, the little creature instinctively lifted his head up. When it dawned on him, and he understood what she wanted, he immediately blew out a breath of relief before he went on to say, I will not need mistress to waste her blood for such a small task. I can handle that on my own. He then prepared himself to make his move immediately after saying that. Qingyu suddenly called out to stop him. You will have only one shot at this, or it will alert the people out there. I need you to succeed the very first time, so I would rather that you are fully prepared. Upon saying that, she then extended her palm forward again. My blood has already been shed anyway, so swallow it quick. You will not be able to get a taste of my blood at any other time so easily. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Seeing that, the earth-fire devil vine could only do as he was told, and he stuck his tiny sharp tongue out to lick the drop of blood into his mouth. The next moment, two tiny flames seemed to ignite and light up his scarlet-red eyes, and he actually transformed into his true form. A dark red vine as thick as a grown man's waist rose right up from the water, surrounded by countless tentacles filled with hooked thorns everywhere, shooting straight up as it grew, like it was reaching for the clouds. In that dim and narrow prison cell, fragmented light rays suddenly shone in, lighting up that small little area. The corners of Qing Yu's lips rose up, as she conjured a protective barrier around her body, to block the broken rock and dust falling from above. Her long upslanted phoenix-like eyes lit up, carrying a bright mischievous glint. Chapter 296. 3. I just wanted some fresh air. Not to escape him. She might not be able to escape from here. But stirring up a bit of trouble was not difficult in the least for her. It had been 1,000 years since this place was built, but had never been used. And the first time someone was imprisoned in there, it was already being wrecked. To dare to imprison her in here without placing a single guard on watch, it was clear to see how confident they were of this prison, that she would not be able to get out of the place. So with such a big commotion, quite a good number of people were alerted. What was that? At that moment, Lian Ji was on his way, just about to go visit his recently acquired brand new little pet. But while he was still less than 100 meters distance away, he suddenly heard a loud crash and saw something weaving and waving furiously in the air, seeming like it was issuing a challenge to him. His lazy, languid footsteps came to a halt, and the man narrowed his eyes. That thing, if he was not mistaken, was the long-extinct earth-fire devil vine, a species said to have been annihilated tens of thousands years ago, due to its overwhelmingly demonic nature, that wreaked quite a bit of havoc for a time. If not for his wide and immense knowledge, he would not have been able to identify this creature at all. But why did it suddenly appear here, and had even wrecked the prison where his little pet was kept? Could it be? Seeming to have realized something, Lian Shi's gaze deepened for a moment, and his body was suddenly moving very quickly towards the source of the commotion. Over on this side, the earth-fire devil vine's tentacles had bored countless holes in the ceiling overhead, when a large portion of the rock in the middle just collapsed. At that point, there was no longer any kind of obstruction above Qing Yu's head, and she could see the pristine blue sky clearly, together with a part of the sun that was just rising with the arrival of dawn. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It had been sinisterly dark within her prison all this time, and she had not been able to tell between night and day. She did not know how long she had been locked in there, and now that she could see outside, she found out that it was now daytime. Qing Yu closed her eyes and took a deep breath, finally feeling a bit of relief and not so oppressed. The feeling of freedom was really most comforting. Suddenly, the expression on her face turned severe as she peered further out front. Someone was making his way here. Qing Yu's lips stiffened and she opened her mouth to say, "Hide away quickly. Don't allow yourself to be seen." Hearing that, the earth-fire devil vine reverted back to his human form in an instant, and blinked his large eyes in puzzlement. He lifted his eyes to look at Qing Yu. Seeing that her expression seemed rather normal, and she did not look displeased, he then obediently slipped back in through her palm, turning himself into a red beam of light as he went to hide. Chapter 296. 4. I just wanted some fresh air. Not to escape in what was seemingly just the very instant before the earth-fire devil vine disappeared. A tall figure appeared very closely right after, in front of her eyes. It was none other than the highly exquisite countenance of the extraordinarily good-looking Lian Shi. At all times on that face of his, it seemed like an almost imperceptible smile hung upon it, causing people to not feel his cold aloofness, but which also told people he was definitely not just any kind soul. Lian Shi slowly walked in closer, and raised a hand lightly. Immediately, the stout and impenetrable metal-barred door before him swung open. Qing Yu had been staring straight at him, but did not manage to see how he opened the door. "Little one, you really have been misbehaving." Lian Shi's footsteps would halt once every few steps, the expression on his face a little surprised as he stared at the absent ceiling overhead that had been wrecked wide open, the once dim prison now bright and clear, and he was a little discomfited by it. He could not help but kept an eyebrow arched up as he looked at the nonchalant and indifferent young lady leaning back against the edge of the pool. He then asked with a smile, "This is done by your hand?" Qing Yu nodded, an amiable smile on her face. "That's right. I felt that it was too stuffy in here, and wanted to let some air in to ventilate the place." The design of this place is really just too inhumane and insufferable, without even a single window. Are you trying to suffocate people to death in here? That is the reason why you wrecked the place. Lianshur said with a soft laugh. You little one are really very audacious. But I think that your claim of wanting to ventilate the place is false, and was instead seeking to escape, isn't it? Qingyu blinked her eyes, the look on her face highly innocent as she spread her palms out and said, It is true that I would really like to escape away from here, but I have still not been able to decipher what these things on my ankles are yet, so I was just looking for something else to do out of sheer boredom. While she spoke, her voice even carried a hint of helplessness. Seemingly feeling a little amused by the young lady's frank and highly candid demeanor, the smile on Lianshur's face deepened further. Good. Looks like you were listening to my words when I told you that those things on your feet are not mere toys, and they must not be experimented with carelessly. So, what are they really? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu lowered her eyes and peered into the bottom of the water. It was blurry, and she could not see clearly. Her eyes narrowed, and the expression on her face turned slightly wicked before she suddenly stretched her hand out to scoop up a handful of the water, and unexpectedly threw it out towards the man, who was just a few steps distance away from her. And just what is this here? I am immersed in it the entire time, and if anything come to happen to me, wouldn't all your carefully laid out plans come to naught? Lianshur had not ever thought that she would suddenly do that, and ended up having his clothes properly soaked by the water. A few drops of it were even dripping off the tip of his hair, which made him look even more wretched. But he was probably born as a person who would not show much emotion on their faces, and even after being pranked on like that, he merely gave a faint smile, and did not seem angry. He then raised his eyes up to look at the young lady, and said in a voice heavy with an underlying meaning, The water in this pool is something really good. It is nothing but beneficial to you, and brings no adverse effects. Chapter 297. 1. Trapped. With no way out. Hearing that, a corner of Qingyu's mouth stiffened in a smirk. In that case, why not you come soak yourself in this essence of goodness as well? Even if it is unable to elevate your cultivation, it should at least strengthen your body somewhat. Ha, you impish lass. Trying to taunt me? Lianshur was unable to suppress a smile. Such things are of absolutely no use to me. Qingyu scoffed indignantly and crossed her arms before her chest as she gazed lazily at the man and said, You people captured my mother and have now taken me as well. It is said that you people are seeking to extract the flame element out of our bodies, in order to create an invincible and immortal human weapon. What? Are you people seeking to reign over the entire world? Hearing the young lady's words, the look on Lianshur's face seemed to show a tinge of surprise. Where did you hear all that from? There's no need to deny it. Anyway, I know what you people are seeking to achieve, but there is just one point that I do not understand. When Qingyu spoke about that, she kept away her nonchalant and indifferent demeanor, and turned to look at the man with a measuring gaze. The contents within this water helps to raise my cultivation. Aren't you afraid that after I grow powerful, I might just run away from here? You are quite intelligent, aren't you? It looks like you've already discovered the peculiar effect the water gives you. Lianshur went a few more steps forward, and crouched down to study the young lady a moment, before he curved up the ends of his lips slightly. This thing you're worrying about will not happen. The reason you are being immersed here in this pool is to let the flame element in your body mature and grow more powerful, so that it will give us the greatest effect when the time comes. Qingyu snorted disdainfully, and then said in a voice filled with contempt, I fear that you might be underestimating me here. This place will only be able to hold me for a period, so if you really intend to hold me captive, can I trouble you to find a better place than this at least? This place here is. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When she spoke up till that point, her voice then paused for a moment, and her face looking like she was secretly gloating inside. She pointed a finger above her head. I would think it's no longer suitable for me to remain here any longer, don't you think? I am such an important prisoner after all. So if anything were to happen to me, you might not be able to answer for it, will you? Lian Shi's gaze followed the direction the young lady's finger was pointing at. With such a large gaping hole overhead, where everything in here was so incredibly exposed without a sliver of cover, it did not seem like it would be a suitable place to hold her in captivity anymore. But when he saw the gloating smirk on the young lady's face, mirth rose in Lian Shi's eyes. He then said slowly in a soft voice, "Although I do not know how you wrecked the place up like this, but since we chose to imprison someone as important as you here, did you really think that this place is as simple as you imagined?" "What do you mean?" Qingyu felt a twitch tug below one of her eyebrows, and an ominous feeling came to rise up in her heart. Chapter 297. 2. Trapped. With no way out after the man asked the question, he suddenly laughed out loud as he straightened his back and stood up. As a deep, meaningful smile came to show on his face, all the broken pieces of rock scattered all around in the pool suddenly started to move, rising up into the air above their heads before Qingyu's eyes. Within the now brightly lit prison, it then started to dim bit by bit. In the span of just a few breaths' time, not a single sliver of light from outside could be seen, but just the dim pulsating glow emanating from the rock of an unknown material set deep within the surrounding walls, glimmering softly. Qingyu's face that had carried a faint smile then slowly froze up. It was probably because the look on the young lady's face was quite amusing to him. Lian Shi smiled at her, and then went on to say with a helpless sigh, "Little one, I've said it before. Do not get yourself immersed in glee too quickly. Don't you feel so completely defeated now, and have lost all confidence in yourself now?" Qingyu was silent for a good while before she slowly lifted her head up to stare at the fully sealed rock above her, and then started to sputter in pure and utter disbelief. "What kind of a damned place is this?" It was just unimaginable. Never had she even heard of something like that. Among the numerous places within the mine-free peak, this place is the most mysterious and unique one. It has never once undergone any kind of reconstruction or modification. A completely natural sacred place born out from heaven and earth itself, versatile and highly adaptable in both its offense and defense. The interior construct is highly unique, and it also possesses the ability of regeneration. So no matter whether one was seeking to force their way in or out of here, it would be a task that is as difficult as climbing one's way into heaven. It was then decided to make this place the most perfect prison, and over the thousands of years, you are its first occupant. You should be feeling rather honored, you know? Hearing the man's lengthy explanation, Qingyu could not help but feel a twitch throb at the side of her temple. Honored? Haha. Really didn't know whether she should say she was lucky or unfortunate. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You alright then. Be good now and do not try any more tricks. If you come to get hurt trying to struggle any further, it will only make me worry about you. Lian Shi said with a gentle look on his face, his amiable tone and demeanor almost causing goosebumps to jump right off the young lady's skin. This man is not only perverted and deranged, he is also rather disgusting. Seeing that he succeeded in making the look on Qingyu's change, the smile on Lian Shi's face deepened. His glance turned to look outside, and he then strangely said in a soft voice, "Wonder if those useless good-for-nothings down there have been frightened off. A good part of the day has passed, and I still have not heard anything at all." Qingyu's ears pricked up at that, and her brows knitted up. "What are you talking about?" Lian Shi cast a sidelong glance at the young lady and then nodded. "I completely forgot. The little one here has been rather well liked out there. Could you possibly be waiting for someone to come rescue you?" Chapter 297. 3. Trapped. With no way out, the mine-free peak has manifested before the people in Cloud Heaven, and a whole bunch of eager and hot-blooded people are currently seeking to make their way up here to see what this place is for themselves. But their tutelage and skills in cultivation have all fallen short, and a number of them have lost their lives. Upon hearing that, Qingyu's face could not help but turn grave. What is the objective you people are seeking to achieve? Isn't it to recruit outstanding talents to work for you? Or are you people just playing a game of mindless killing? Why are you getting so worked up for? Liansher curved up the corners of his lips. You said it yourself. What the Mine-Free Peak needs are outstanding highly skilled pugilists, and all these second-rate good-for-nothings will be killed sooner or later anyway. So the Mine-Free Peak is just being kind to teach them a free lesson, that's all. Ah, twisted reasoning. Qingyu scoffed with her eyes narrowed, looking like she did not want to speak with the man anymore. Liansher was unperturbed but merely said smilingly, You just be good and remain here. There's no need for you to struggle in futility, and do not think that anyone will come here to save you. The more hope you hold, the greater the disappointment will be. And I'm afraid that you might not be able to take it in the end, you know? Immediately after saying that, he did not wait for Qingyu to respond, but turned with a billow of his sleeves, and the cell door opened under his command. After he walked out, the door then shut itself back in place with a boom. Qingyu remained in her spot as she gazed deepened, watching the man's departing figure, and it was a good long while before she came back to her senses. The Mine-Free Peak has appeared. Yao and the others must already know that she is here. So could they be among that group of people? She had deciphered from the man's words earlier that just the very first obstacle of coming up to the Mine-Free Peak was as difficult as climbing one's way up to heaven. What should she do? Qingyu sighed out in helplessness. Is she really going to remain trapped in here? Throughout her previous and present life, she had never been placed in such an aggrieved and wretched situation. She could not help tugging at the bindings on her ankles out of frustration. She really felt like cutting off those shackles, but remembering that depraved man's threatening warning, she had to hold herself back from doing that. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Mother. Just as she was feeling utterly gloomy and depressed, an adorably young-sounding voice suddenly sounded in her ear, which somehow felt rather familiar and strange to her at the same time. Qingyu was inevitably taken aback. This voice, doesn't it belong to that inextricably sticky little ball of fur she accidentally took in as a pet back in the constellation continent's Hades Canyon? One that loved nothing more than to eat, a little fella named Meatball. The first time it saw her, it had followed her doggedly like it had seen its most favorite meat bone, and she had found it so adorable she could not help but to keep the little creature by her side. Chapter 297. 4. Trapped, with no way out but, ever since she came to Cloud Heaven, that little fella had remained inside the spirit beast realm, and had not come out for such a long time, causing her to almost forget about the little fella's existence completely. But having not heard a single sound from it for such a long time, why has it appeared all of a sudden? Meatball. Qingyu blinked its eyes, calling out to the little fella. The very next second, she suddenly felt a weight on her left shoulder, as a tiny round ball of coal plopped itself delicately on it, rubbing itself against her neck needily, its voice soft and mushy as it spoke into her ear. Mother, Meatball really missed you so much. I am finally able to see Mother again. Hearing the little fella's mushy voice call out to her repeatedly, Qingyu's heart almost melted, and she went on to say with an amused smile, Did you really miss me? You suddenly went away, and it's been almost half a year that I've seen you last. I've almost forgotten that a little fella like you even existed. Upon hearing that, Meatball seemed highly aggrieved, its azure eyes glimmering as it looked at her, its tiny lips pouting pitifully. It then sniffed vehemently before it said in a soft, tiny voice, Meatball did not run off somewhere to go have fun, but it is because I sense great danger in this realm, and I was scared that I will be kidnapped, never to see Mother again. So, I did not dare show myself. Seeing how pitiful the little fella looked, it did not look like it was lying, and she knew the little fella quite well. Although the little fella was quite mischievous, and was rather playful, it always liked to stick to her, where things that concerned her were placed as its first priority. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. For it to not show itself for such a long period of time, it must be as the little fella has said, that there was some kind of danger hidden within Cloud Heaven, something that terrified the little creature. But, when that thought came to Qingyu's mind, she could not help but raise an eyebrow. How come you dare to come out now then? You mean you sense that it is safe here? You've got to be kidding. That man locked her up in here, and has so confidently not thought to place a single guard to watch her. So this must be a highly secret and well-hidden place. A place that people are not able to enter easily, where she might actually be being watched secretly. But that thought had just entered her head when the little fella on her shoulder nodded resolutely and said, "That's right, Mother, it is very safe in here. I don't know how this place is formed, but it is very special. It isolates any kind of aura within this place from outside completely, so I will not be discovered appearing in here." Chapter 298. 1. Danger averted. Problem unraveled. This place is able to isolate the presence of your aura from outside. Qingyu's eyes widened slightly in surprise as her hands reached up to her shoulder to bring the little creature before her. "Are you saying that people outside are not able to sense who is inside here?" "Yes." Meatball nodded its head innocently. It then seemed to discover the predicament the young lady was in at that moment, where it then blinked its eyes at Qingyu in puzzlement. "What happened to Mother here?" "As you see," Qingyu said a little helplessly, as she ruffled the little beast's ears. "I am trapped here, and have no way of getting out." Hearing that, the little beast's eyes peered around for a while, before it slipped itself into the water with a soft splash. "Meatball." Qingyu was shocked by the little beast's sudden action, and she quickly turned her eyes to look down into the water frantically. The water was actually not deep, barely reaching up to just over her chest. Although the water was red as blood, it was however clear and unclouded, allowing one to see through it thoroughly, the view below the water's surface unobstructed. Gazing down through the water, Qingyu saw the little fella hovering around her ankles as it approached the shackles inquisitively, and it even stretched out a paw to touch it gingerly as well. Qingyu's heart jumped immediately, watching the little beast intently. Fortunately, the little fella was not hurt. The little beast looked at the shackles for a short while more, and came to discover something strange. "Mother, the metal ring is so big. Why can't you just pull your feet out?" The width of the ring was at least 1 time wider than her ankle, and she would only need to change her foot's angle slightly to free herself from them. Upon hearing that, Qingyu could not help but let out a resigned sigh. "Do you think I have not tried that?" After she said that, Qingyu summoned up her spirit powers to shrink her ankles. She was just about to pull her foot out when the metal ring reacted as if it had eyes, shrinking in size in tandem with Qingyu's ankle. It was only when Qingyu's ankle reverted back to its original size that the metal ring followed suit and transformed back, before it settled back into inactivity. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Meatball's eyes widened in shock by what it saw, seemingly unable to believe its eyes. It could not resist stretching out a sharp claw, and was just about to try to slice it open. When she saw that, Qingyu immediately tried to stop the little fella by opening her mouth to say, "Don't touch it so carelessly. I still have not come up with a way to free myself from them. Brute force will not work here." Hearing that, Meatball could only retract its claw reluctantly. But having not been able to be of any help, the little fellow was feeling a little dejected. It stood there with its head hanging gloomily. Qingyu was silent for a while, and then suddenly seemed to have an idea, her eyes lighting up in a sparkle. "That's right. Meatball, are you able to go out from here?" Chapter 298. 2. Danger averted. Problem unraveled. I can do that, but there are things I am scared of outside, so I do not dare to. The little beast lowered its head sadly, staring into its paws. Qingyu could not help but raise an eyebrow, not knowing what could be out there that would frighten the little fella so much, though something so simple like concealing one's aura was not difficult at all for her. Here, this elixir is not just able to conceal your aura to hide your presence, it can also make you invisible for a good 6 hours. As long as you do not touch any humans, you will remain invisible to them. Qingyu opened her palm, and a pristine jade white elixir pill sat quietly in her hand. The little beast blinked its eyes a couple of times, and then leaned its head in to gulp down the elixir in its mouth. "Mother, can you see me now?" The mushy-sounding voice sounded once again, but the figure of the tiny ball of coal could no longer be seen. Qingyu laughed softly, See for yourself over the water's reflection. The air fell quiet for a moment, and then the little beast's delighted squeal was heard. I really do not see myself. I am hidden. I do not have to be afraid anymore. Mother, what can I help you with now? Qingyu opened her mouth to reply. Go down to Cloud Heaven to see what the situation is like down there, and come back to tell me all about it. If you happen to see little Bei, tell him that I am doing very well, and that he does not have to worry. Got it, Mother? I will bring him the message. Be careful with everything that you do. If you encounter any danger, remember to keep yourself safe first. Qingyu reminded the little beast. Rest assured, Mother. Meatball is very good at this. As long as I do not encounter that scary thing, nothing will happen to me. After those words were spoken, the place fell quiet, and not a single sliver of noise could be heard. Qingyu knew at that moment that the little fella had left. Hopefully they are all still well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU at that moment where Cloud Heaven's intersecting borders sat. A good part of the day has passed, and the sun was starting to show signs of setting. In that period, there were some who did not believe that it could really be that difficult, and had gone out to attempt to try to scale those glass steps. In the end, not a single one had come back alive. Damn it! Since we can't even make it up those steps, we might as well all just leave. It is clear that the mind-free peak is just intentionally making things difficult for us. The person who said that was a young disciple from the Divine Healer sect. One of his fellow disciple he had been close to had gone up there earlier, and though he had not encountered that vicious attack, the glass steps below his feet had suddenly disappeared completely when he was just at the halfway mark, causing him to plummet to the ground. That had really infuriated a good number of them. From what they could see, it was impossible for anyone to make it up there. With the strange stairs that disappeared, and vicious attacks that struck out of the blue, it was impossible to guard themselves against them. Chapter 298. 3. Danger averted. Problem unraveled. It was not so bad here at the Divine Healer sect, when compared to the Hunters Guild, where more than 10 of their people have lost their lives. When their first member died, Zhuge Xiong had thought that it was merely an accident. So he had sent out others to go scout for a way up those steps, but all of them have died, without a single exception. Have you been able to spot anything strange? Seeing that almost half of their people have been decimated, Zhuge Xiong could not help feeling a little frustrated, and his eyes were tinged with suspicion as he looked at Qing Tianlin. Is this fella even reliable or not? I know it now. Qing Tianlin nodded his head slowly and went on to say, these stairs, since one is unable to climb them through conventional methods, then the only thing left to do is to destroy them. What did you say? Zhuge Xiong's eyes were wide as he stared at the man. How are we going to get up there if we destroy those steps? This is the only way. Those people from the Mind-Free Peak have overestimated themselves. They think that no one could possibly come to think of such a thing, and employed such a sneaky trick. How sneaky? Qing Tianlin said with the corners of his lips curled up, his voice contemptuous. Hearing that, Zhuge Xiong's brows knitted up and replied questioningly. And what if your plan still does not work? Wouldn't all our efforts have been wasted for nothing? Qing Tianlin was just about to open his mouth to explain when a clear and indifferent voice sounded out not far behind him. Little Yen, go destroy that thing. Yes, young lord. A sweet nubile voice then rang out in response. The next moment, before anyone could even react, a petite little figure suddenly leapt up into the air, to soar through the air towards the glass steps. Both her hands then lashed out in front of her, and a highly searing black flame launched out to engulf the glass steps completely like a long weaving dragon, the fire growing in intensity as time passed. Heavens! What is that little lass doing? Is she trying to destroy the steps to completely sever each and everyone's chances? Everyone look! Why is there water dripping from those steps? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After that person's voice fell, everyone could not help but to turn inquisitively towards the steps, and they saw that water was indeed dripping down from the stairs that were wrapped in thick black flames. A short while later, The young girl then retracted that strange mysterious fire, before she slowly descended onto the ground. Looking at the stairs again, those glass steps have completely disappeared, without a single trace of it left behind. And the thick misty clouds that surrounded the mine-free peak were all gone as well, the entire place revealed unobstructed before everyone's eyes. It was only when everyone saw the true face of the mine-free peak that they came to realize why those people who went up there had disappeared. Right before the splendid and majestic architecture, a deep chasm that was several tens of meters wide could now be seen. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.